Welcome back to Geography for Term 4. This term we're going to be starting off with a unit called Humans Shape Places, and it's about developing an understanding of the management of places by state and local governments in Australia. We're going to have a look at zoning and infrastructure, and we're going to study some appropriate questions to guide an inquiry about a local issue of interest to you. We're going to learn about collecting information from primary and secondary sources and organising and representing data in a range of formats, considering different viewpoints, and then you'll present your finding in a persuasive format. So what are we working towards? We're looking at how do people influence places and the management of spaces within them. That sounds a bit wordy to begin with, but we'll break it down each lesson. Our syllabus outcomes, so we want you to be able to compare and contrast influences on the management of places and environments. We want you to be able to explain interactions and connections between people, places and environments. We want you to acquire, process and communicate geographical information using geographical tools for inquiry, and to be able to describe the diverse features and characteristics of places and environments. So lesson 1 is, how do people manage spaces in the community? Our learning intention, or our guiding question for this lesson, is how do people manage spaces in the community? So we're going to be answering that by addressing our success criteria. So once we can describe what infrastructure is and give examples of different types of infrastructure, explain who and what types of infrastructure the 3 levels of government are responsible for, and determine which infrastructure fits within each zone or land use type, we'll be able to answer that question: how do people manage spaces in the community? So what is infrastructure? The types of spaces within a place form part of its infrastructure. So the infrastructure of a place is the human features a place needs to make it suitable for people to live and work. So examples of infrastructure include parks and recreational areas, roads and footpaths, and schools and hospitals. We're going to watch this video of SimCity, and as we do, I want you to think about what some of the infrastructure might be that's shown, because you'll have a follow-up task afterwards. So let's watch. So later, from your Google Classroom workbook, you'll be able to watch this again, and then I want you to list some other spaces or features of infrastructure that a place has. So in your Google Classroom workbook, it will look like this. So it will ask you to watch the video of SimCity again with the link attached, and then list some spaces, features of infrastructure that a place has. And you can include places that your family use on a weekly basis when we're not in lockdown. So where do you go regularly? Lots of those places will be part of the infrastructure of your community. So as we move through, we're going to be talking about different types of government. Before we do, I want to have a talk with you about what local, state and territory and federal mean. So I'm going to start with federal, and we can see that here on this map. So federal means countrywide. It means, in this case, the whole of Australia. Excuse me, I'll just take that out. Okay, so if we're looking at Australia, this is federal. So if we're talking about federal government, we're talking about the whole country, the whole of Australia being governed by a group of people, a group of representatives voted by the people of Australia. So then we talk about state and territories. And within Australia, there are 8 state and territories: Western Australia, Northern Territory, Queensland, South Australia, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, and the Australian Capital Territory. So that's what we mean when we talk about state and territory. We're talking about these smaller segments of the country that have their own levels of government as well, that look after different types of infrastructure. And we'll get to that in a minute. Then we'll look specifically at New South Wales as our state. So within the state, it's broken down again into different levels of government, into different sections in communities. So if we can see all of these red lines, and that's what that indicates the different LGAs, or local government areas. You might have heard a fair bit about LGAs, or that term frequently with COVID restrictions and that sort of thing lately. And these red lines all outline different LGAs. Okay, so this one here with Katoomba, this is the Blue Mountains LGA. As we go in a bit closer to where we are, we can see both the City of Parramatta LGA and the Cumberland LGA here outlined. You probably, most of you would live in either of those two LGAs. So that's what we talk about local councils. So councils are these smaller areas. Then we've got state or territory, which is New South Wales, for example, or Queensland, or Tasmania, or Northern Territory. And then we talk about federal, which is the whole country. So each of those levels of government are responsible for different types of infrastructure. So first we have the residents. They're the people who live in local areas, but are affected by management of local, state and federal levels of government. So residents vote for who gets to make decisions for us in the other levels of government. Local council are your local LGA, so they're responsible for things like your parks, your libraries and your supplies of electricity. Examples include LGAs of Cumberland and the City of Parramatta, areas where you might live, like we just looked at. State and territory governments are responsible for things like health, so hospitals, police and education systems, although some of these have shared responsibility with the federal government as well, so sometimes they work together. And then federal, as we said, is whole country government. So federal government decide on laws that affect everyone, and they're in charge of infrastructure like postal services, aviation and telecommunications. So they might share responsibility of other things like those that I mentioned, but also of most roads and highways are managed by a couple of levels of government. So who does what? The states and territories make the rules for infrastructure, so how spaces are organised, but it's up to the local councils to apply their rules to their local area. So the state and territory will control big projects like dams and mines and ports, but local government, so the states and territories, divide into local governments because the states and Northern Territory are very large areas. So to help organise them, they're divided into local governments. These are usually called councils, but can be further defined as cities, shires, districts, regions, towns, boroughs, or municipalities. The ACT has no local government, so they just go with federal government rulings. What local government area do you live in? Just a bit of a rhetorical question there. Have to think about that. Local government is in charge of applying the state rules of planning to their local area. So to help with this, they divide their areas into zones for use. So all councils want their residents, or the people that live in their area, to be happy. And to do that, they have to find a balance between giving people the infrastructure that they want and the infrastructure that they need as well. So in your Google, so what goes in each zone? Well, in your Google Classroom workbook, you're going to write the words from the word bank into the correct zones. And you could add some more if you wanted to. So there are different types of zones: regional zones where residential zones where people live, commercial zones where people might buy things, industrial zone where people work, community zone where community activities take place, a vacant zone, places with nothing on them, and agricultural zones for farming. So this is taken out of your Google Classroom workbook. If you go there now, you'll be able to complete this task. So you need to write the words from the word bank into the correct zones. The first two have been done for you. So here's the word bank. I've taken townhouse and thought about which zone that might need to go into. It's where people live, so it goes into a residential zone. Then supermarket. Where does supermarket go? People don't live at a supermarket. Yes, people work at a supermarket, so it could kind of go in either, but it's mostly where people buy things. It's not community, it's not vacant, it's not farming, so it goes in commercial. So you need to go through each of these places, each of these examples of infrastructure, many of them, and put them in the correct zone. Okay, so you can do that in your Google Classroom workbook. Remember, you'll also have the SimCity question again, so watching that video again and identifying different types of infrastructure there or others that you can think of, and then filling in your table. I hope you enjoyed this introduction task to our new unit, and I look forward to seeing the work that you produce. Have a great day.